Story Time with Stephanie Story.
Hi, I am Stephanie Storey, art historical novelist. Welcome to my show, Story Time. My guest today, this is the first time on this show that I have been able to sit down and talk to a playwright. So we are going to talk about stage theater and about all kinds of writing. I have had the honor and privilege of seeing a lot of his work staged in theaters in Hollywood. And it is always a combination of like heartfelt relationship drama, but it's always really funny. Like there's always a note of humor, which is why I love him. He has a book out called Hearing Voices, 15 Short Plays by a Psychotherapist. Welcome to the show, Paul Saracy.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was a lovely introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm serious, and that I always love going to your shows because and you and I met in a theater that I think we both love. I know I love, Actors Workout Studio in North Hollywood.
Yes.
Where we were like in a writer's group together, and I always loved your stuff, no matter where in the process you were, because it did have that unique combo of relationship, but always a little bit of humor. I wasn't going to start here, but now I am. Is that just who you are as a person? Do you work toward that? Like, is that like a hard craft move? What's the deal with that particular combination, which is so lovely?
Well, Stephanie, first of all, thank you so much for your observing it and then and appreciating it, because I think that one could say that would be my signature move in terms of as a writer, is that I tend to write, I think the phrase that I've heard a lot is poignant comedies, the kind of comedies that make you laugh and then make you think, and sometimes will even make you cry, you know, that you'll be laughing and then you'll be emotional. And I love that kind of back and forth. And yeah, that kind of comes naturally to me. I have a bit of a flair for comedy. I did stand-up comedy for a while in New York, Long Island, New York, and Queens. And so I know how to make people laugh. I was making my mom laugh from very young. So I felt very confident. My first high school play that I wrote in high school, it was actually a church Christmas play. And believe it or not, it was about the trial of Jesus part 2. And that was also a comedy, believe it or not, as a Christmas play, if you can believe that. Yeah, part 2, because I brought him back. I brought the Lord back for a second trial. He had his first one. I'm bringing him back for the second one. So, and I had some fun with that, and it was, you know, it didn't offend. Even in my small evangelical church, it didn't offend back then. And I wrote that first play when I was 17. So it kind of, that's what I know to do. I know how to write poignant comedy.
I always feel like when I go into a theater, I'm ready to emotionally experience something, maybe more so than I am. You know, when I open up a book, I'm going to go sort of mentally escape. And when I go into a movie theater, I expect to be really entertained. Mm-hmm. When I go into a theater, the little red seats and the black box, and you're there in person, I really expect to have an emotional experience. What is it about the theater, do you think, that particularly does it give us more access to emotions, do you think? Do you think it's particularly geared as a writing art form to create that, or am I just crazy?
Yes, I would want to tell you that I have the same expectations. And I think theater lends itself to that because maybe the closeness of the audience to the actors and the performance. I mean, there's the fourth wall that's there, but there is a closeness and a proximity, and you could hear those actors breathing, and you could see them spit out. The spit comes out of their mouth, and if you're in the first row, maybe you get some of that. So to me, and it's a very confined space as well, so that you've got the zoom in focus on relationships. And I think when you're looking at relationships, as opposed to, you know, a Star Wars movie, or, you know, these films that take you all over the place, you know, the Tolkien trilogy, and, you know, you go everywhere in science fiction, they create whole worlds for you. But sometimes, boy, that small stage is where you look for people relating to one another. um, and taking you in. Hopefully, you've created some characters that people resonate with, and I'd like to hope that you've created at least a couple of characters on that stage that they're rooting for. Because you're not rooting for anybody, you can lose interest right away. You know, if there's nobody on stage there that you care about, you're in trouble as a writer.
Okay, so you have put up plays for years. Why did you finally put them together in a book and publish them?
You know, Stephanie, was probably a couple of things that work, but again, as you know, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I've been doing the work for a dozen years now, mostly working for Kaiser Permanente. And you know, you talk to a lot of folks, a lot of patients, and especially elderly folks. And sometimes the question they really want to ask, or they do ask, is, you know, does my life have meaning? Does my life have purpose? Really, what have I lived my life for? Sometimes, especially, you know, if a person comes in depressed and kind of facing his latter years, not feeling good about what he's done or she's done. And what I wanted to, what I've struggled with a bit myself, maybe I'm a little younger than some of these folks that I'm talking about, but the idea of leaving a legacy, that I wanted to leave something behind. I also, though, it occurred to me that as a therapist in the last 6, 7 years, as I settled into my marriage with my lovely wife, Natalie, and as I settled into this career as a therapist, you know, I'm doing it 12, 13 years now. So about 5 years in is when I began to look around and say to myself, you know, I really would like to go back to my first love, my passion for words, for language, for storytelling, which is in the theater. And I went after it pretty good. I had a pretty good 5-year run where I produced three nights of my one acts. I got 2 of my posters here. This was the second one I did. This is the third one I did. And then I did Homecoming, which you were kind enough, I believe you came and saw it one night, which was a full-length play. So I did 4 or 5 decent pieces inside of 5 years while I was working full-time as a therapist. So I felt like I was quite productive during that 5-6 year period. And I thought it was worthy of a book. At that point, I said, you know what? I think that I've written around 20, 25 plays now, short plays, a couple of longer ones, but 20, 25 short ones. I said, I think I could pull out 15 that I'm proud of, really proud of, and put it into a book and be happy that if nobody ever read anything else about me, but just read my book, Hearing Voices, you know what? I did okay. At least they know who I am. They know what I stand for. And I tried to do some good in the world, because most of those plays in the book are hopeful and try to lead people to the light. I'm a big fan of, you know, there's so many things around us that are, you know, bring us to the darkness, bring us to sadness and frustration and depression. So me personally, I prefer to light a candle in the darkness. You know, that's not my quote, obviously, but, you know, light a candle. You know, don't complain it's dark. Just start lighting up candles. And as far as I'm concerned, every play I write, well, maybe not every one, but a lot of them are candles that I'm trying to light up in the darkness, as far as I'm concerned.
But the subtitle of your book is 15 Short Plays by Psychotherapist. So after years of doing all the psychotherapy and sitting there and listening to people, actors, stage plays particularly, I think, are about relationships. So what did you take from all of those years in being a therapist that you feel like gives you special insight into this world of humanity that we try to put up in the theater and movies or in books? I mean, it's all the same. When you're creating those kinds of stories, you're really dealing with the weirdness of people and our weird relationships. So what did you take from your years of therapy that you put in there that gives you special insight into that?
So you know what I take is I think where I get at least some of the humanity that I try to instill in my work, in my characters, is I certainly know that there's so many people that we know are disenfranchised, that are looked down on or judged for many, many reasons. Obviously, recently, you can't miss it. It's on the streets, on the television. It's racial inequality, racial injustice, and Black lives do matter. We certainly believe that. And me as a therapist, though, I also would include, that people, raised in devout religions sometimes are very judgmental and sometimes do damage. People raised in abusive families and that have been criticized and critiqued, whether it's for weight or their look, or that they don't play sports well enough, or you're not man enough. So there's all different kinds of ways that we human beings, we grow up feeling less than. And my job as a therapist is to, first of all, give permission for people to own that they were, in a sense, emotionally abused on some levels in the way that they grew up. And hopefully, more than that, to acknowledge the abuse. We call it abuse. It could be many different things. We call it critique or, judgment. But those critical voices that carry with us, hopefully, not only acknowledging those critical voices, but I also want to connect the dots for people, try to create awareness of how growing up like this in the way you did, lots of us learned survival strategies on how to stay alive, growing up in the difficult conditions we grew up in. We all learned survival strategies. And I'm saying this to say that in my work, what I try to infuse my work with is that idea of trying to connect the dots a little bit. I mean, I don't want to say too much. I don't want to be too much on the nose. I want to talk, and I want to inform, and I want to create awareness around when this happens to you, look at what you did to survive that. And you know what? You're still living in survival mode. And I wonder if we can get you to the point where we can thrive. Kaiser Permanente will love me for that, by the way, because their slogan is, you got to thrive. Kaiser Permanente wants you to thrive. So anyway, that's what I know about therapy, or a little of what I know is I want to give people a chance to tell their stories because they're fascinating. And so many times you walk away with just the idea of how strong and how resilient people are, how smart people are in the ways that they learn to survive very, very difficult childhoods and circumstances of tremendous abuse. And I'm looking, but sometimes people come in my door. By the time I leave my door, it's like I just have to shake my head. It's almost like I take my hat off to you because you're a survivor. You're a strong person. You're resilient. And you're amazing in how you learned how to survive such difficulty. And hopefully, if I do my job right as a therapist and perhaps as a writer, I want to get people to the next level of, okay, beyond survival, how do we get there and help you to begin to throw off these burdens, these feelings, these critical voices that you've carried with you all your life? How do we get you to be more accepting of yourself, more loving of yourself, so you can go to the next level and feel good about who you are?
Have you ended up writing about stories or relationships or humans that you might not have otherwise felt the capacity to write about because of what you've absorbed through therapy? Or are you still primarily just writing about yourself like we all are?
Well, it's funny, if I broke down the book, Hearing Voices, 15 short plays, I would tell you that 4 or 5 of those plays about me and my wife. I'd tell you that the first and the last play is about me and my dad. So that's about 7. and, and then I have at least 1 or 2 is about my friends or my brother's friends growing up there in New York. But there's absolutely a couple that are in there that that were inspired by patients. Now, I want to be very clear about this, Stephanie. When I say there's a couple of stories in there that have been inspired by, you know, relationship type issues, breakups, very common, right? As common as could be. So one of the plays in the book is called Finding Faith, and what happens to a guy named Bobby when he breaks up with his girlfriend and he goes on a somewhat of a bizarre search to find himself because in a way he felt like he couldn't hold on to the relationship as he was. So he does all these bizarre things. He starts reading more, he stops eating, he throws out his cell phone and begins talking to himself, and finally he's hearing his own voice. But when the girlfriend comes over and the play begins, the girlfriend comes over and confronts him with all this crazy, bizarre stuff he's doing. I realized that I was writing that story about how anxiety and a breakup can trigger such stress, such anxiety, such panic that it takes people in, you know, into a challenging place that they have to go through. But as I wrote that story, I talked about how, and again, this is the funny part of the story, is that part of how he was evolving as a person when he was without the girl before she came back to visit, is he started to study fish in aquariums. He wants to build an aquarium. Why? Because fish to him, he discovered, are like Zen Buddhist monks. They don't worry about the future, and they're not thinking about the past, the tragedies that happened in the past. And by the way, worrying about the future, that's an anxious mindset. You know, you go into the future and you catastrophize. That's anxiety. That's an anxious person. And a depressed person tends to go backwards in time and regret the paths not taken or the choices they made that they regret. But you can't do anything about either one. And part of what he needs to understand, and through those fish he does, those little Zen Buddhist monks, they're not thinking about anything. They're just doing their thing inside the fish tank, swimming around in the power of now, in the present moment. And by the way, staying in the present moment is what mindfulness is all about. Mindfulness is the next big, you know, therapeutic modality. It's so wonderful for people, teaching people to stay present, stay in your skin, live in your skin, feel your 5 senses. Don't go into the future and think catastrophe. Don't go back and regret things you can't change. So those fish represented, to me, they represented mindfulness and the power of now. And that's what this character basically said to his girlfriend, that's what he was discovering, because he's an anxious son of a gun. So that would be an example of, you know, all right, now, so I wrote about anxiety and how some people will deal with anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be one example that I would say, inspired by a breakup. Now, did any of that come from an actual couple that broke up? No, but it's inspired by.
I never would have thought you would have like taken lives of people you were therapying and put them into a play. But that's exactly what I was saying, is just through the course of being a therapist for so long, you have a particular understanding about depression and anxiety that the rest of us are not as subtly conversant in. But one last quick question. So what are you writing moving forward? What's your next project look like? What general direction are you heading in with the 5, 8, 12 things bouncing around in your head?
Okay. Well, one of the things that I'm most excited about and proud of, and I've probably already got 8 or 10 friggin' drafts in so far, is a piece on a radio talk show, late night radio talk show host, that gets a call from a suicidal caller, and then how he has to handle that or not. And I would call it a dark comedy, and I would want to tell you that again, I'm trying to write characters that are very human and that you care about them. And but I would want to tell you that it has the capacity to be a full-length piece. I think I got about an hour or so right now for it. And so that's one of the things that I'd really like to bring to completion. Some people have compared it to Bogosian's piece, Talk Radio, from many years ago. And I probably saw that piece like 30 years ago in New York at some time, but haven't read it since. But my story is interesting in that it's based on an NPR story that I heard on the radio on some levels. I mean, obviously, as you well know what we do, we take dramatic liberties, of course, to make it interesting. But so that one's called First Time Caller. Long time listener, but first time caller. So it's that one, and it's the piece about these two theatrical giants that I don't want to say much more than that about, but I could be so very happy. That's been percolating for about 5 or 6 years. Did a lot of research. It's one of those things that I've done so much research, I know I need to just write it, you know, but there's a part of me, like, it's interesting, you interviewed that wonderful author, novelist that had 40 years a writer, and she had 80 novels. The one that
Barbara Delinsky.
Correct. And I was happy to hear her say, and hear you say during the interview, that yeah, this historical piece is the one that I don't feel I can write well enough. So I've kind of not really taken the big jump into the deep end of the pool because it frightens me to write it. But, you know, I'm being ridiculous now because it's been a lot of years and I need to write it. So so that's the one that I'm going to say is exciting me.
And can I tell you, if it frightens you to write it, that is exactly the piece you should be writing. That is for you. That is for everybody at home. If it scares you to write it, that's exactly what you should be doing, because it's the old stuff worth doing, right?
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you, Stephanie.
I love you, Paul. I love your spirit. I love your writing. I love everything about you. I kept you way too long. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you for joining me and being here and talking about playwriting with me and comedy and therapy and people and brilliance. And I love you, and I hope to see one of your pieces up again soon in the Los Angeles. And everybody else, I'll see you next time. Bye.
Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.